I just checked the clock, and I don't know if your clock says the same thing as mine, because we might be in different time zones. I'm not quite sure how this whole thing works right now, but my clock said it is Storytime with Uncle Scotty. Oh, wow! That's convenient because I am Uncle Scotty, and if we are here at Storytime with Uncle Scotty, I am Uncle Scotty. Hello! We have our own mugs. Don't forget, you can get your own mug at Patreon. Jump over there and see us. We also have bookmarks if you would like. And with the bookmarks, you can write down a list of all the books that we read together. Or maybe that you read alone. Or with anyone else. Reading is important. Also important, washing your hands. Look how clean my hands are. My hands are so clean, it's like I have gloves on. They're shaped and colored the color of my hands. These gloves are clean like my hands. Okay, we have been reading Sideways Stories from Wayside School by Louis Sackercher. Sackercher. And this book has been about all the people in the 30th story of Wayside School, which was built 30 stories up like a skyscraper instead of like a school. We have our last 3 people to learn about here. So shall we? Chapter 28, Nancy. Nancy had big hands and big feet. He didn't like his name. Twist. He thought it was a girl's name. None of the other children in Mrs. Jewell's class thought that Nancy's name was odd. They didn't think it was a girl's name or a boy's name. Nancy was just the name of the quiet kid with the big hands and big feet who sat over there in the corner next to John. John had the round head, I think. Nancy was very quiet and very shy. He was ashamed of his name. He only had one friend, a girl who went to class on the 23rd story of Wayside School. They were friends for a good reason. He didn't know her name, and she didn't know his. They just called each other, "Hey, you," or just plain, "You." Nancy was afraid to ask his friend what her name was, because then he might have to tell her his name. He could never figure out why she never asked, but he was happy just to leave well enough alone. One morning, Nancy and his friend were late. When they got to the 23rd story, his friend's teacher was waiting outside. "Hurry up! You're late, Mac," said the teacher. Nancy's friend turned red. She didn't move. "Come on, Mac, shake a leg. Get the lead out," said the teacher. "Your name is Mac," Nancy said. Mac was very pretty. She had red hair and freckles. She covered her face and ran into the room. "Ah. My name is Nancy," Nancy called after her. Mac stepped back outside. "I was ashamed to tell you my name," she said. "Me too," said Nancy. "Nancy's a girl's name." "Oh, I think it's cute," said Mac. "I like the name Mac," said Nancy. "Mac is a boy's name," said Mac. "My mother has a rich aunt named Nancy," said Nancy. "That's why she gave me the name." My mother once had a dog named Mac," said Mac. "Hey, do you want to trade?" Nancy asked. "Can we?" asked Mac. "I don't see why not," said Nancy. "Okay," said Mac. They both spun around 100 times. 100. In opposite directions until they were so dizzy that they fell over. When they stood up, Mac was Nancy, and Nancy was Mac. Nancy, Mac, Nancy, Nancy. They said goodbye. Then Mac raced up to Mrs. Jewell's room. 7 stories, because they were on the 23rd, they go to the 30th. He was no longer shy. "Hi, everybody. My name's Mac," he announced. "I traded names." He held out his big hand. Todd jumped up and shook it. "Hi, Mac," he said. "Glad to meet you." "How you doing, Mac?" said Ron. "Howdy, Mac," said Terrence. "Nice to see you, Mac," said BB. "You traded names?" asked Jason. Jason didn't like his name either. "That's right, Jason, old boy," said Mac. "Is that allowed?" asked Jason. "Why not?" said Mac. "Hey, anybody want to trade?" Jason called. "I'll trade with you," said Terrence. He didn't like his name either. Wait. I'll trade with you, Terrence, said Mauricia. Mauricia didn't like her name. No, he's trading with me, said Jason. I'll trade with you, Mauricia, said Damien. No, thanks, said Mauricia. Ooh. I'll trade with you, Damien, said Mrs. Jules. No, I want to be Mrs. Jules, said Stephen. It turned out that nobody in Mrs. Jules' class liked their name. All the children spun around in different directions until they got so dizzy that they fell over. And when they stood up again, nobody knew who anyone was. What are we going to do, Mrs. Jules? Asked Leslie, who was really Eric Bacon. My name is not Mrs. Jules, it's Mauricia, answered Terrence, who was really Jason. It is not, I'm Mauricia, said Dee Dee, who was really Joel. You're both wrong, said Mauricia. I'm Mrs. Jules. This went on for an hour. At last, they figured out who the real Rondi was. She was missing her 2 front teeth. And then after they figured out Rondi, they were able to get Allison pretty easily. And from there, they got DJ, Damien, and Mrs. Jules. She was the oldest one. Eventually, they figured out who everybody was. They had some difficulty deciding which Eric was which, and actually they still are not absolutely sure. Everybody decided just to keep their own name. The children didn't like them, but it made things much easier. Mac and Nancy kept their new names, but when they were together, they still called each other, Hey You, or just plain, You. I like Mac and Nancy. That's nice. Now, speaking of names, I don't know if you like your name or not. My name is Uncle Scotty, maybe you know, because I have my own mug. But I have a confession to make. My actual name that I was born with is not Scotty. It's actually Scott. But Scott is my middle name. My first name is Hal. It's a weird one. Not a weird one. It's one that's not used so much anymore. It's a rare one. I was named Hal because my dad's name is Hal. And I'm a junior, which means I have the same name as my dad, except for junior. So it's Hal Scott Crow Jr. But they couldn't call me Hal because we already had a Hal in my house. My dad was Hal. So if they were like, Hal, we both would be like, hey. By they, I mean my mom and my sister. So it probably wouldn't have been too confusing. But you know what I mean. We can only have one Hal in the house. They called me Scott. But then when I got to kindergarten, there was another Scott in the classroom. And so I was like, I'll be Scotty. Because we can't have 2 Scotts in the classroom because we're like, Scott. And because I couldn't be Hal at school and Scott at home. You know what I mean? I just needed one name to just really, my little brain couldn't take too much. So I went by Scotty in kindergarten. And now I'm a grown person with a kindergartner's name. Let's continue the story. Chapter 29, Stephen. Stephen had green hair. He had purple ears and a blue face. He wore his sister's pink dancing shoes and green leotards. The leotards matched his hair, because they were green. He was all dressed up as a goblin for Mrs. Jules' Halloween party. But unfortunately, it wasn't Halloween. Ha ha ha, you sure look stupid, said Jason. Now, again, that is a word that we don't use. Uncle Scotty doesn't use, you shouldn't use. Louis Sachar is trying to use it to illustrate a point about Jason being a mean kid. Bullying, not good. X Jason out. Don't like him. But Jason was Stephen's best friend in this story. Jason was Stephen's best friend. So do you, said Stephen. This is not good. Propagating the conflict. Boy, you are dumb, said Jenny. This is, you, okay. You know. Making a point. Said Jenny, Halloween is on Sunday. Today is only Friday. You're the one who's dumb, said Stephen. Ha ha, you'd probably come to school on Sunday. Mrs. Jules said we'd have the party today. Because remember, Jenny went to school on Saturday. But none of the other children wore costumes, only Stephen. All right, class, said Mrs. Jules. It's time for our Halloween party. See, said Stephen. Mrs. Jules gave each child a cookie. I was just talking to my special friend who's in this room with us, being very quiet. I was just saying how much I wanted a cookie. And now a cookie has come to me in the form of words. It's delicious. Each child wanted Mrs. Jules gave each child a cookie that looked like an orange witch with a black hat. She laughed when she saw Stephen and forgot to give him one. Oh, man. Stephen didn't ask for it. He was too afraid that she'd laugh again. Oh, she laughed when she saw Stephen and forgot to give him one. Stephen didn't ask for it. He was afraid she'd laugh again. The children finished their cookies in less than 30 seconds. Ding! All right, class, said Mrs. Jules. The party is over. We have a lot of work to do. Stephen felt like a fool. The party lasted less than a minute, and he had to spend the rest of the day wearing his stupid goblin suit. This reminds me of the story that I'm going to tell at the end of this story. Look! Stephen's wearing his sister's leotards, laughed Dana. Leotards are like a dance outfit. They're green just like his hair, said Fatso. It's one of the Erics. Eric Bacon, the skinny one. Everybody laughed. Mrs. Jules began the arithmetic lesson. She wrote on the blackboard, 2 plus 2 equals 5. That's wrong, Joy shouted. Mrs. Jules tried again. 2 plus 2 equals 3. That wasn't right either. She added 2 and 2 again and got 43. It was useless. No matter how hard she tried, she could not get 2 plus 2 to equal 4. I don't understand it, she said. They've always equaled 4 before. Suddenly she screamed, ah! The chalk turned into a squiggling worm. She dropped it on her foot. Then all the lights went out and the blackboard lit up like a movie screen. A woman appeared on the screen. She had a long tongue and pointed ears. She stepped off the screen and into the classroom. It was the ghost of Mrs. Gorf. Mrs. Gorf ran her fingernails across the classroom. Trick or treat, you rotten kids, she said. Now I'll get even with every last one of you. Where's Todd? Who is that? Asked Mrs. Jules. Mrs. Gorf, said Damien. Who's Mrs. Gorf? Asked Mrs. Jules. She was the meanest teacher we ever had, said Rondi. What happened to her? Asked Miss Jules. Louis ate her, said Jason. It's true. Remember, Mrs. Gorf had turned all the students into apples, and then when she turned them back into kids, she was going to turn them back into apples, and somebody held up a mirror, and she turned herself into an apple, and then Louis ate that apple. That was Mrs. Gorf. Well, I'm not going to allow this, said Mrs. Jules. Get out of my classroom, she demanded. It's Halloween, sweet teacher, said Mrs. Gorf. Ghosts can go anywhere they like. I've come for a little class reunion. But it isn't Halloween, said Mrs. Jules. Halloween is still 2 days away. I know, said Mrs. Gorf, but Halloween falls on a Sunday this year, so we are celebrating it on the Friday before. Stephen leapt up from his seat. See, I was right, he said. Today is the day we celebrated the Friday before. Mrs. Gorf proved it. He ran up to Mrs. Gorf. They all laughed at me and made me feel stupid because I was the only one who got dressed up. But they were the ones who were wrong. You and I are right. He put his arms around Mrs. Gorf and hugged her. Mrs. Gorf gasped and disappeared. The lights came back on. Mrs. Jules picked up the piece of chalk from the floor. She wrote on the blackboard, 2 plus 2 equals 4. That's good, she said. When 2 plus 2 doesn't equal 4, anything can happen. All the children who had laughed at Stephen now called him a hero, but they told him to change out of his stupid costume. So at lunch, Stephen went home, washed his hands for at least 20 seconds, I'm sure, and changed. He came back wearing blue jeans and a polo shirt. Lowercase p. Polo style, not Polo the brand. This book is not an endorsement for Ralph Lauren or Polo. Of course, his hair was still green. It always was. And we'll find out what happens next time. Next time on Storytime with Uncle Scotty. I have been your host, Uncle Scotty. We have our own mugs. I was going to tell you a little story. I don't know if it's going to be funny or not. But when I was in middle school, there was Spirit Week. And Spirit Week, every day was themed, and you wore something that day to school for that theme. And I was in 6th grade, so I was the youngest student at this school, and I was trying to fit in and be cool. And I was excited to participate, because I was like, maybe this is a good way for me to, like, meet people and show how cool I was. whatever that means. And at the beginning of school, everybody went to the cafeteria. So you waited in the cafeteria until homeroom started, and then you went to homeroom, but the whole school was in the cafeteria at the same time. And I put on my celebrity costume because it was Celebrity Day, a Spirit Week. Monday was Celebrity Day, so everybody's supposed to dress up like a celebrity. And I wore the only outfit that I had of a celebrity that I knew of, which was an outfit that I had to look like Christopher Columbus, which I didn't know until I walked into that cafeteria with everyone in the school there, and they started laughing at me. Like, I walked into this cafeteria and it went silent, like in the movies, it went completely silent. And then all of a sudden there's like rolling laughter of people laughing at me because I had on this thing that kind of looked like a dress. It's like a black dress with a bunch of like brass buttons on it. And I got to the table with my friends and they're like, "What are you wearing?" And I was like, "It's Celebrity Day. Like, who are you?" And I was like, "Christopher Columbus." And they're like, "That's not a celebrity." And it just showed me at that time in my life, I didn't know what a celebrity was. And to me, a historical figure like Christopher Columbus, as problematic as I found him to be, was a celebrity. But that's debatable now. Okay, that's been more than you need to know. Thank you to time. Because without story time, what is time? Nothing. We'll see you next. Bye.